Hello and welcome to Basecamp, a climbing magazine podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Riley. Thank you for tuning in. Have quite the episode for you. First, we're going to be speaking with Anton Krupicka, a well-known endurance athlete here in Boulder. He was the first individual to come upon Kyle Walker, the climber that fell from the second Flatiron, and captured it on video. That video ended up going viral online and was featured all over the news. The incident caused some controversy online about scrambling, so I want to get Anton's account of the accident and how this accident and others have impacted his own feelings about the craft. We also spoke about the Scram pack by Ultimate Directions that he designed. It's a very well thought out minimalist Alpine pack for moving quickly in the mountains. I've been wearing it. I actually took it up the Skywalker Couloir this morning up in the Indian Peaks, and I just absolutely loved it. So Anton shared his inspiration to design the pack and some of the intended uses. Then we have a conversation with Chris Schulte, a professional climber and boulderer and recent recipient of the Access Fund Climbing Advocate Award. We talked about his Alpine bouldering article in Climbing's June-July issue, about what inspires him to put up FAs, and how he got into climbing in the first place. So without further ado, let's get to it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Tired of the same old lifestyle climbing shoe? Time to check out the Evolve Rebel, winner of Climbing's Editor's Choice Award. It has a lightweight feel and water-repellent upper, a cushioned midsole coupled with a rubber toe cap for durability, and heel side reinforcement for stability. But don't take my word for it. Hear what these climbers have to say. And have you seen the new Evolve Rebel?
I have, yeah.
What do you think?
They're sick. I love them. They look cool. They look steezy for sure.
I just got a pair in the mail, yeah.
What do you think?
I love them. I think they're awesome. They're like, crack with the club type deal.
Have you seen the new Evolve Rebel?
No, not yet. They look, they're light. These are nice. Yeah, looks pretty good. Like, solid, comfortable, all-day wearing shoe.
The Evolve Rebel, available now at REI and REI.com. Yeah, so what have you been up to recently? I saw you just did a bike race.
Yeah, I guess, was that yesterday I just got home? No, day before yesterday, Sunday. Oh, yeah, we were in Kansas for a 200-mile bike race, and it was fun.
Yeah.
I've biked that far probably 3 or 4 times before, but never raced that far. It's a much different experience when you're trying to go hard.
Yeah. And what else have you been up to? I saw on Facebook that you have an injury you're dealing with.
Yeah, so I have a stress fracture in my femur, kind of like the proximal shaft of my femur, and that happened 3.5 weeks ago. My previous plan for the summer, I had all kinds of running and climbing plans, and now I've been in crutches actually the last couple of weeks. I got the stress fracture, immediately went to Italy for a week, just limping around on it, traveling. Came back, got it imaged, and yeah, stress fracture. And so I don't know, the femur's a big bone, so it might take a while to heal.
What's a while? Probably. Have you talked to
Well, now I'm
doctors
getting
and
old,
stuff?
dude. I'm 35. Stress fractures used to heal in a couple months, and now I had one 4 years ago, and it took from April until August to heal that time. So I'm hoping that this doesn't take until September. Well, I don't know. I mean, I love fall too, but mostly I want to be able to get some alpine rock climbing in before it starts getting cold and snowy up there again,
Yeah.
So,
last time we chatted, I was actually injured, and it was the worst summer season ever because I was just so excited to get up into Rocky Mountain and the Indian Peaks. And
was that maybe earlier in the spring though when we were talked? I can't remember.
it was, it was a little bit earlier, but still, I was out for quite a while with a sprained ankle.
Oh, is that what you had going? Okay.
It was just the worst.
Yeah. Those things take forever to heal too, because you always retweak them. And
Unless you're Alex Honnold.
Yeah, they get so weak and it's bad. But I don't know. The cool thing though is I can still bike. I should be back to climbing. Man, I was trying to climb in the gym just last week, and it's funny how you don't realize how much is you're pushing off of one leg when you're climbing, and it was hurting just doing that. So, but hopefully I can start doing some roadside stuff next week, and then in a couple weeks from now, maybe get back in Aldo and
nice.
Yeah, keep the climbing game going at least. So
Cool.
But yeah, biking for sure is good still.
Nice. Well, I want to talk to you about this second Flatiron incident because when I read about it, I got to admit to you, I thought it was a hoax because, I watched the video. I saw some of the comments where Kyle thought he was like on a 513 and he was in running shoes. I was like, this has got to be a hoax. Nobody would be that crazy. And there's not a 513 on the second Flatiron. So it seemed like a publicity stunt to me.
Yeah.
And then I read that you actually came upon Kyle and helped with the rescue. And I was like, okay, well, I got to talk to Tony because it's obviously not a hoax. Maybe if you could kind of take me through that day before you came on to Kyle, like what were you up to in the Flatirons that day?
Well, it was definitely not a hoax. I've been involved in a few accidents in the mountains, but nothing this graphic, I guess, probably.
Yeah.
That particular day, I was just out for kind of like a very typical scrambling circuit for me. I'd already gone up the first, and I was kind of running down the freeway on the second Flatiron, and planning on heading over to kind of the Bluebell Canyon area near the fourth Flatiron, where there's like Morning After and Challenger and Green Mountain Pinnacle, like that kind of stuff. So I was just totally in my head, like charging along. When I was about halfway down freeway, I heard somebody yell kind of off to my right, from below like the Pullman car there. And my first sort of inkling was, that's sort of a rude way to say like, good morning, like I was just a little bit like irked, but then I realized quite quickly, like immediately that this dude was like needing help and was like calling for help. And you could see even he was probably, I don't know, less than 50 yards away from me at that point, like line of sight, but I could see that he was bloody and, beaten up. So I scrambled over there. He was basically along with the route Free for All, which, is like the 5-6 way to the summit of the second Flatiron.
Sure. And
got up to him and like immediately, even before I got over to him, actually, I stopped and called RMR because I could just see like he was broken up, there's blood on his head, all over his body, really, just a bunch of like road rash.
And what did you tell them on the phone? What was the
so that was kind of it. It probably wasn't really worth calling them that early because I was like, I'm on the east face of the second Flatiron. There's a fallen climber below the Pullman car, below the summit block on the east face. And they're like, is he conscious? I'm like, yeah. Is he breathing? Seems like it. I mean, he's yelling at me,
Yeah.
But then, so I was like, oh, well, let me like scramble over to him and I can give you like more of an update of what's going on. And so I did. I got over there and it was obvious. I can't remember which arm it was, but one of his arms was obviously broken. It was just like displaced, And, I guess he broke both of them though. And just all kinds of rash, just like scrapes all over his body.
Sure.
And he didn't have a shirt on. Pretty bad head wound. Like I can't remember one of his temples. So then I called them back and was like, yeah, he's, clearly has a pulse and is conscious and lucid. Like, I asked him his name, Kyle. And
do you know how long he had been there before?
No,
you
and
got
he didn't
to
know
him?
either. That was one of the things I asked him, and he didn't know. Like, obviously,
yeah, because he was in and out of consciousness, from what I heard.
Seemed like it. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he was knocked out at some point. And kind of came to, but so then I was just sort of, gave them my number, and we were just kind of in phone contact to kind of guide them to us. And they were super prompt. Within maybe like 10 minutes of me hanging out there, like I gave Kyle my shirt and because I couldn't find his anywhere, and maybe he just didn't even have one with him. And he was obviously in shock. And it was just like one of those mornings where it was probably like close to 60, but if the sun went behind the cloud, it was still kind of chilly.
Yeah.
And let's see. Yeah, within like 10 or 15 minutes, another dude who was just scrambling up freeway just kind of wandered over to us. Like I didn't call him over or anything, and he came over. I can't remember his name. I think maybe Adam.
Okay.
And he also gave Kyle a shirt, and we just kind of were hanging out there with him. Like RMR called a couple more times just to kind of like pinpoint where we were. And, eventually, when they had started, like actually, they drive all the way up to like Bluebell Shelter there. They started hiking up. I was like, cool. Like Adam, if you stay here with Kyle, you're cool with it. Like I'm gonna scramble back over to the trail and just intercept RMRs so they can like get them exactly, where we are and everything.
And did it seem desperate at this time, or was he staying with it? Did it seem pretty stable?
It didn't seem to me like he was going in and out of consciousness. It seemed like he was conscious, but just in a lot of pain.
Okay.
Which is understandable.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I think he ended up breaking his pelvis, both arms, a few ribs. Yeah, I can imagine. Collapsed lung, kind of crazy. And so I did that, scrambled over, intercepted the guys coming up, helped them carry a couple ropes up. And that was kind of it then. They're like, oh yeah, like I'm like, he's right down there. And they sort of wrapped in from the trail there off a tree. And I went on with my day.
And then what did you do after? I mean,
I remember, I think I went up green. Well, I know I went up green, and I'd have to go back and look at my training log, but I think I might have come down Bear Canyon, then up like Regency, Fifth Flatiron, Royal Arch, Fist. I don't know. It's like the most continuous long bit of scrambling in the Flatirons. It's really cool. But I can't remember exactly, but that.
So you weren't really shook up from the whole situation at all, huh?
I don't know. I just felt kind of removed from it. Like I've spent a lot of time in the Flatirons and have seen a lot of different people up there. Most of them are pretty solid, but the second itself is so accessible. It's really easy to get in over your head if you don't know anything about climbing, and it sort of seemed like that was the case with him because he was in running shoes. Not only was he in running shoes, but they were like road running shoes with barely any rubber on the outsole.
Yeah.
It was like they weren't even like trail shoes, let alone sticky rubber approach shoes or trail running shoes.
What's your feeling about how he got into that situation? I don't know if you followed it all on.
I did. I've read the Mountain Project thread and was, sort of dumber for it. But I mean, that place is pretty bad, it seems like. I hadn't really realized how toxic
it's going to get even worse now that Super Topo is all closed.
Shut down, yeah. But I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, has he touched base with you at all?
So my buddy Bill Wright actually put us on an email together, and I just kind of waited for Kyle to reach out, but then like I was out of the country, and so I don't know, but I didn't get an email from him, and I don't know. It's just I don't feel like I just happened to be the first human to come upon it. You know, I didn't really have any connection to it other than that. But I guess I don't know. I just thought, yeah, somebody just. I guess I didn't. I was a bit surprised afterwards when the full story came out, like how technical and obscure of a route he was attempting.
Yeah.
I thought maybe he had literally had slipped off of like Dodge Block or something, which is kind of like that gully route that goes up there beside freeway. And then, or maybe he had fallen off of Free for All, the little 5-6 section to get up and traverse underneath the Pullman car. And,
but he was on North Crack, which is like a 5.9
plus. So I'm assuming it's sandbagged. It's 9 plus and
tons of lichen on it.
Yeah, rarely gets climbed. A bunch of like old pitons on it. My buddy Tony Bubb has climbed it, I know, and he was saying it's tricky, and I think he has a pretty good.
Yeah, he's climbed a few routes around here,
and he's climbed a lot. He's climbed like basically every route in the Flatirons.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know. I was just very surprised. So then I guess when somebody was knowingly going up like a sandbagged 5.9 in road running shoes, that's when I knew like, oh, he just like really had no idea about this world, which is like a rank novice, I guess.
Sure.
So,
and it was a little strange to me that he went online afterwards and started posting these somewhat sarcastic.
Yeah, everybody has their own personality.
Yeah, I guess
it's not the way I would have handled it, but teach their own.
And were you surprised by how much it was picked up by the mass media? I mean, that was all over the evening news, not just here in Colorado, but nationally. It was in all the papers.
Yeah, ABC like contacted me actually, and I just declined to comment.
Interesting.
I don't know. I didn't feel like it was the kind of thing that was newsworthy.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that it showed up. I think it was mostly just because they had a video of it.
Yeah, I just thought it was like a very local, kind of like novice climber accident. Like why? Just because there was GoPro involved doesn't make a national news.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I didn't feel it was worthy of being national news, and therefore why would I comment on it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
And unfortunately, a week later, another individual passed away in Eldo.
oh, right.
On the
Yeah,
Bastille.
Yeah, on Bastille, right. Yep.
Which was, just super unfortunate. And I don't know, it made me think a lot about scrambling and free
Yep.
soloing.
Yep.
Is that something that you reflected on after,
Yeah.
these incidents that happened so close together? Because, you do
Well,
so much
they're way
scrambling and
different, though,
soloing.
because the guy who fell off of Bastille was a very experienced climber
Mm-hmm.
and a very experienced Eldo soloist too. I feel like maybe the first time I ever climbed an Eldo, I encountered him like soloing up Calypso or something.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, here nor there. No, of course it makes me reflect on it, because I've soloed Bastille Crack, and I've always thought of it as being like not that comfortable actually.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's kind of slick, but
You're an influencer. You're posting a lot about soloing and scrambling around here on the Front Range.
yeah, I feel like there's a big difference between scrambling in the Flatirons and soloing in Eldo, but and I don't know, for me, I guess, like a year ago, someone who was actually buddies with Jason Wells, passed away in Yosemite, and using, climbing tactics that myself and a lot of my friends use all the time, just simul climbing, running it out on easy terrain, that kind of thing. And that one really made me like step back and be like, whoa, like maybe it's just like put in more gear. Like it's dumb,
Yeah.
Why would you run it out like when you have gear on your harness, and yeah, that one made me think a lot more, I guess, just because I actually knew Jason, and I had never formally met Bob, and the man who fell off of Bastille, and I guess, and I just knew Jason to be a supremely competent climber, and I wouldn't have ever expected him to like make a mistake. It just felt so like random and objective rather than skill based, So I don't know. That one really, that one shook me for sure.
Okay, well, let's talk about something that's maybe a little bit less dark.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. This is like a heavy and very like, I think it's like a very personal topic for anyone who climbs without a rope, and it's hard to like, I don't know, putting into motivation, like into words, like your motivations, and because I think that like the headspace is what protects you, know, and when you're soloing, and so anytime that that little veneer gets shattered a bit,
but sometimes that could save you, right? Like,
yeah,
if you're
like,
so
realize,
confident, you might go
it.
over the line. But
Yeah.
if you're not as confident, you might say, you know what, this just isn't worth it. And that's a lot, like something I've been thinking about recently. Like, okay, I love scrambling in the Flatirons, but do I need to do it all the time? Even when it's like a day like today where it's maybe not raining, but it feels like it's about to rain, or it's humid. It's
I'm
like,
out there all the time. Yeah, when it's like, I've like been racing thunderstorms on the Flatirons,
Yeah.
and stuff, and because you just get so confident with the terrain, and it's silly. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. It's like tough questions.
yeah. Well, let's talk about the scram pack that you designed for
right, okay.
Ultimate Directions. I actually just got one myself. I love it.
Okay.
So you got this cool little like minimalist backpack that for alpine climbing, ski mountaineering, stuff like that. Can you maybe tell me about the inspiration behind the pack, as well as the process of designing it?
Yeah, I would say for me the inspiration was definitely a couple of years ago. I don't know, things just line up sometimes with your climbing where like partners are psyched and you guys mesh well, and a couple of summers ago that was happening for me in the Alpine here in Colorado, like in Rocky Mountain, where I was just getting on Alpine Rock a lot, and we're linking together a lot of routes and in a day, and realizing that you could approach some of these moderate Alpine rock routes in a more like aerobic way, basically, where you're approaching very quickly, you're running between routes, and then you're like running the descent, and you're simul climbing with micro tractions and that kind of thing. So maybe you're only carrying a 30-meter rope, and there just wasn't a pack that was a mix between sort of that cardio of being able to carry both your calories and your water up front, so you don't have to take your pack off while you're like hucking it up to the diamond, like running sections and that kind of thing. And also being a very like slim, highly technical Alpine rock pack that carries everything you need and nothing more for a day out in the high country, stably and well and kind of unobtrusively as possible. And so that was the inspiration for the scram. And I think that we kind of nailed it. I don't know. It can maybe be a couple liters bigger. It just depends on what your use is.
Well, there's another one that's similar, right? Like
the All Mountain, which is closer to 30 liters. I think it's a little bit behind in the development process still, but the scram is on the market right now.
Yeah. So what was like step one of creating this?
Step one was, so the designer at Ultimate Direction, which is here in Boulder, just out in Gun Barrel, this guy Anders Mavis is awesome. It was hands-on from the very beginning. Basically, I just took in like my favorite packs and was like, we need to make some combination of these basically. Like, these are the features I like on this pack and these are the features I like on this pack, and let's try and like meld them together and, make the ultimate pack. And just, I think I had a prototype. I can't remember. It was already a couple years ago. And, like the fabric wasn't burly enough. So then we kind of updated that, and the ice axe holders weren't working quite the way I wanted them to, kind of wanted to be able to like take an ice axe off without taking the pack off. And, for silly situations where you are like, if you're a ski mountaineer and it seems like you're often like booting up a couloir, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh boy, I wish I had crampons on. I wish I had my axe. Like, it just feels sketchy instantly, so it's just iterations of that and testing it. I remember a big test I did with it last year in the spring was a full traverse of the Gore Range on skis. We didn't get the last peak. It turned into a very long day. But anyways, it was sort of, to me, kind of like proof of concept, because it ended up being really burly at the end of the day with a lot of bushwhacking, and the pack held up well. But, it's a really high cardio thing where you want to have water and food up front so that you can like keep moving without having to stop and to just, get out a water bottle or something. But then also like constantly changing, like getting an axe out, putting crampons on, taking them off, like all that stuff, having quick access. You don't want to A-frame up your skis. You want to be able to have like that standard Skimo hook and loop carry, so you can just take your skis on and off your pack very easily. And that was, like a big test for the ski mountaineering aspect of it. And I thought it worked really well. Yeah. And then now it's finally on the market, and I think I'm happy with the way it turned out. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I love it. I've taken it on a few multi-pitches, taken it up Dragon's Tail.
Oh, okay.
And,
right on.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed it myself. So nice job.
Yeah. And that's exactly the kind of missions it's intended for, in my opinion. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's all the questions I had. So appreciate you stopping by. Appreciate you telling the story.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks. It's always good to speak with Anton and wishing him a speedy recovery. Hopefully he's up in the mountains sooner than later. Next, we have our conversation with Chris Schulte. But first, a word from one of our partners, the Access Fund.
You kind of get up in those finger slots and you grab that horn with your right and grab grab that left edge, and then you surf to that arête with your left hand.
As climbers, it's important that we all do our part to protect the climbing areas we love and to be good stewards of the land. Recently, Matt Salmon and I went climbing with the new executive director of the Access Fund, Chris Winter. I got to ask him a couple questions.
So what are some of the biggest threats that we're facing right now?
Well, as climbing is growing so quickly, some of our climbing areas, our more popular climbing areas, are being loved to death from overuse. Public lands are political football right now. Land managers are dealing with shrinking budgets, and a lot of the hardware is aging. So we're at this pivotal moment where the sport's growing quickly, but we have a lot of these threats that we have to get our arms around.
And what can climbers do to get involved?
The best thing they can do is to support the Access Fund and support their local climbing organization. So join the groups that are really speaking up and trying to do the good work on the ground for climbers. And get involved. Show up for stewardship days, trail days, and learn how to talk to your land managers about climbing.
Awesome. Well, let's try to take down this monkey bar traverse, shall we?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Become a member and get involved at accessfund.org. You've done a bunch of podcasts, though. You were just on Jam Crack, huh?
Yeah. I've been on Niall's show a couple of times. This was the first one that we did. That was like actually an interview. I've done a couple of readings for him before.
Seen that.
And it was kind of funny. We did it in the middle of the day in a pub, and
You're in Europe, right?
Yeah. At the time, I was in Sheffield.
Okay.
I'd gone to be in Font for a stretch, and the weather was pretty bad. Went down to Switzerland for a while, and then came back to Font for a stretch, and then had a week in Sheffield, climbed some grit, and
Was that your first time on grit?
it was my second time. I'd been like 10 years ago now, and it was cool to come back.
What's your feeling about that style of rock?
It's amazing.
Yeah, you
I'm
like
a huge
it?
fan. Yeah, the shapes and the textures is really good.
Were you climbing boulders or routes? Or I guess they're kind of very similar over there.
Kind of, yeah. And I will say, like, sometimes you go up to some of the cliffs there, and you're like, oh, that's cute. That's basically a highball. But then you go to some other routes or even some highball problems there, and you're like, wow, that's freaking tall, man.
Yeah.
And with terrible landing and all that, but it's so green and so pretty there. But it was kind of a spur of the moment sort of trip.
Yeah.
I had intended to go back and climb routes next time I went, but just wasn't prepared, you know? So went and made a little video for BD, and hooked up with a couple photographers, and just sort of had a good time. Springtime over there. You know?
Yeah.
Sun was out. Everything was green, getting greener.
That's
you know?
nice.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to recently? You told me you were over in Durango and looking to get to Indian Creek. Did you make it out there?
Yeah. Let's see. When did we talk last?
Well, just over email, I think like a week ago.
Yeah, like a week ago. So let's see. I got back from Europe end of February. And pretty much went straight out to Indian Creek and was there for a couple of weeks. The season's been really dragging on out there. Winter's been kind of coming back and forth.
Yeah, it's been happening here too. It seemed like it was going to be over, and then we got these crazy storms.
It's really been stretching out.
Yeah.
So like it should be like kind of getting hot in the desert by now. But yeah, I mean it snowed a few days ago. Like it snowed a considerable amount. But I was there and had some really good conditions.
So you've been bouldering. You're kind of known as a boulderer, I would say, right?
Yeah.
And do you
for
think
sure.
of yourself as a boulder?
I mean, I think of myself as a climber, I guess.
Yeah,
but
that's a good answer.
I mean, I've been climbing just this year. I think it's 25 years.
Okay.
And I started more into alpine climbing and ice climbing and stuff, and then trad climbing, and then all of a sudden I was going to Penitente in the creek, and and then I was kind of just bouldering, and I pretty much just bouldered for over 10 years now.
But recently I've seen you putting up a lot of first ascents over in Indian Creek. Maybe not a lot, but you've been putting some lines up, right?
A lot of boulders and a handful of routes as well. In the last couple years, maybe like the last 3 years, I've kind of been poking slowly back into route climbing.
And where's that motivation come from to get back on the routes?
Well, at first, I think it was just being out in the creek and putting up boulders and boulders and boulders. And a lot of the best lines out there, which is kind of what you can go for out there right now. Everything's fresh, so you pick the sweetest plums, kind of. And so I guess the motivation probably came from being out there and climbing on these kind of taller things, and always looking in between the lines out at the creek, seeing all these arêtes. You can't help it. They're amazing. And it's just kind of outside of the ethic there. People are, you come to the creek and crack climb, So a lot of this stuff gets overlooked. Despite there being actually a handful of really good bolted and mixed routes out there. So, the perception out there is different. So there's a wide open space out there for development. If you're into, now that we, mentioned grit routes and stuff, if you're into that style, there's a ton of stuff out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was just kind of Well, it's one of the cool things about climbing. If you do enough of one kind, or if you get tired of something, you can switch over to another one.
Mm-hmm. And is there a style of rock that you look for when you're looking at, development? I mean, is there a certain type of rock that really catches your eye?
So I want to say what drew me to climbing it was the shapes,
Mm-hmm.
Like I always thought things like Cerro Torre and all of these peaks in Pakistan and whatnot are just awesome. And I kind of look at bouldering the same way. Like I want to climb some shape that's attractive to me. I want to climb a line,
Mm-hmm.
I don't like chase after, movement as much as a line.
Okay.
Impressive lines, compression if I can find it. And, to get more particular, if I had to pick, I'm a pretty big fan of sandstone. The desert's really, the desert really appeals to me right now. And, I'd say my 3 favorite climbing areas in the world, let's say for boulders, are Font and Ticino in southern Switzerland and Indian Creek.
Yeah.
And I was just in the last 2 months in all 3 of those places, and in rapid fire, the creek's it's kind of holding first place for me right now, just because of the lines and the space, and the setting is really good.
Yeah.
Like being there is really cool. For options, for potential, for peace and quiet. What have you.
And speaking about like kind of the creek and that atmosphere, you just recently got an award from the Access Fund, the Athlete Advocate and Steward Award.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've always been active in conservation, but what does it mean to you to be recognized by the Access Fund, and how do you kind of like look back at that?
Oh, it's pretty generous of them. It's nice to be thought of in that way. I would say I first started working with the Access Fund, kind of coming in from the side. We had like the Black Diamond Access Fund Rock Project series, which ran a handful of years ago. And that was kind of a gym to crag educational initiative, I would call it, where we would go to big cities that had a big climber population in the gyms. And we would basically go and teach these clinics about, hey, a lot of you have never been outside, right?
Yeah.
We did one in Brooklyn, and no one in this 20-something person clinic, no one had ever been camping. Only one person owned a car, and they live in the city, So, for example, in that example, we went out to the Gunks for the day and did like a little micro trash cleaning, chalk brushing project, and then just went climbing. And, we all rode a bus up there and whatnot from Brooklyn and bussed back down, got back at like 11:30 or something.
Yeah.
And as soon as everyone gets off the bus there, you see phones light up, and like exchanging numbers and let's do this again. And it was like this instant community thing, it was pretty cool. It was cool to watch, so we did that for a while. I guess that was my first more direct exposure to working with the Access Fund. I've known Brady Robinson, who has, well, now he's moved on from the Access Fund, but I've known him for a good handful of years, and I came to him asking him actually about, well, what are your thoughts, both personally and professionally, let's say, on an Indian Creek bouldering guidebook. Like, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm concerned about the impacts that guidebooks can bring. If you were to do this, if the Access Fund had input on this, like, what do you think about this? And first of all, he was like, wow, you're the first person to ever ask any of us any kind of question like that. But thanks for coming. Thanks for asking.
Well, that's interesting, though, because at the place where I learned to climb over at Farley Ledges in Western Massachusetts, the one rule they had is no guidebook. And they still have that rule. Like, they've opened it up, they put it in a parking lot, but they do not allow a guidebook just because of the masses that would be coming from Boston and New York. It definitely does bring a crowd when you make it that easily accessible and you don't require that mentorship when there's no guidebook,
It definitely does change things quickly. I mean, there's places all over Utah that are like that, everyone knows about Mill Creek, but there's no guidebook. There's a little bit on Mountain Project or whatever. And there's, massive parking lots and trail down there now and whatnot. And and everyone knows, but this still kind of keep it under the radar. There's some stuff in the mountains around there that are the same way.
So what did Brady say?
Well, we talked for a long time, and I don't know, we still kind of talk about it off and on.
Yeah.
I'd say, one of the points to focus on in the world when you're developing an area and thinking about releasing it to the public is like, is there historical precedent out there, and what kind of impact are you looking at? What's already there? How are you getting to these boulders, for one? And that's, for me, that's one of the pluses of the many, many pluses and minuses of a guidebook, is like, driving around out there, you see there's a boulder, it's on the side of the road, straight shot, 500 yards out.
Yeah.
Well, you don't just park on the side of the road and plow across the desert to get to it.
Sure.
And to find a lot of these things, maybe they're in drainages or whatever, way up some other little side canyon. And, it does take just a little bit, not a lot at all, but a little bit of awareness and consideration to go out there and not lay waste to the place as you're just trying to get to the rock, like you're following drainages, you're following cattle trails, which, I mean, cattle grazing's been going on out there for a while, and the cows have done an amazing job of getting you trails almost right to all the bouldering areas you want to get to. So, just a little consideration there. Those were the two big points, I guess, that we covered straight off. But yeah, like I said, we still continue to talk about it. And it's he's one of the people I call when I'm just struggling with the the yes or no,
So you're a pro climber. You've been in the industry now. You said like 20. You've been climbing 20, 25 years. Why has it been such a big part of your life and your climbing career? When you have so much else going on.
When I started climbing, I think there were just a lot. There weren't so many climbers.
Yeah.
And I started down in Durango, Colorado, which is fairly isolated. It's got great and pretty rich climbing history, but at the same time, there weren't a whole lot of people down there. And even what we would call a busy crag now was usually pretty quiet. So traffic was low. Everybody knew everybody. And maybe it was just a smaller world. And also, I think, I feel like I came just at the cutoff end of a generation where people tended to start climbing from some other outdoor activity. Like everybody who was a climber, you went camping when you were a kid,
totally.
Or maybe you were into hunting or like riding bikes or something, whatever. We didn't have the gym explosion that's happening now. So the demographics were just a little bit different. And going to these places, like, again, like the shapes attracted me when it came to climbing and goals and so on. But initially, the cool thing about climbing to me was to go to these kind of empty places, these really cool places. Rocks are cool. Hanging out places that have rocks. It's neat. It's cool geography. It's cool landscape and little ecosystems and whatnot that are unique to each individual area. It's nice, and you grow to appreciate that. So working within this like ever expanding and contracting sort of wavelength of awareness of like, all right, I'm concentrating on the micro, which is like the one move on my project, to the bigger picture of like, that's the 11th great sunset in a row or what have you. It's and different places have different languages and different histories and different styles and whatnot. I think just with travel and with time, and you develop an appreciation for a place, and you want to take care of it, and you want to keep it kind of the way maybe you found it, so that other people can have the same chance at the experience that it's been for me being a climber. I feel lucky.
Yeah, totally.
And you look at areas like Fontainebleau that are like 100 and something years old, and they've gone through all kinds of stuff over the years, from like nailed boots and chipped holds to like to the invention of sticky rubber, to like inventing circuits, to raising standards, and they've been doing it for 100 years. It'd be cool to say, to look at some of our areas and be like, wow, that one's looking good at 100 years old,
Yeah, absolutely. So you wrote an article for climbing, and it's Prep for Alpine Bouldering. It's going to be in our June-July issue. It's part of the skills department. Can you maybe point out a few of the tips that you put in that article, and maybe if you were to speak to somebody who had never been alpine bouldering before, like what's the one thing that you would want to impress upon them?
Pack a lunch. Oh man. Yeah, bring everything. Oh man. I remember my first bouldering trip up to what we think of around here as the Alpine. It was, I think, the year after all of the big initial groundswell of development in bouldering went on up there. When like Dave Graham and Luke Parody and Joe Kinder and I don't even remember who all was going up there. Jim Belser was up there, like crushing. Right around that time, I think it was the following year, I came up here from Durango, where I was living at the time, to visit a friend, and I remember hiking up the Bear Lake Trail, just suffering, and I even lived at like 7,000 feet. And I was like, man, when is this going to be over? And you get up there, and a lot of stuff is kind of long and kind of steep and covers a lot of rocky ground, and here comes weather. There's a lot of things. You jump right into the deep end of the pool in a way, which is kind of funny because you're still like an hour from the car. Yeah. But you're kind of out in the rain and thunder and lightning and stuff, like,
and that stuff comes in quick.
Super quick, and you can rely on it.
Yeah, you can.
So yeah, I guess first and foremost, keep your eyes open. Yeah, be prepared. Staying warm and dry is key, and not dying of thirst or hunger is a good idea too. Your metabolism speeds up, you get dehydrated faster. It's freaking freezing cold 1 minute and cooking too. I can't do the project right now, I can't stick.
Have you ever had any epics while alpine bouldering?
Oh my god, yeah. Jeez, first one that comes to mind was being up at the Hallett Boulder, above Emerald Lake and under Hallett Peak. I was working on a problem there. Gosh, maybe is it Stranger in a Strange Land? I can't remember the name of it now. Anywho, it's kind of this tiered roof over a square cut sit down on it boulder. That's kind of like right in the middle of the crux, And you're in this kind of techie little bicycle, and I fell out of that move and sat on my left foot right on the corner of this rock and broke my foot.
Oh.
And again, you're not that far from the car, but yeah, crab walking and hopping and stuff like that. That was like kind of, it wasn't the best. You can always find a good walking stick until you need one. But yeah, a long way down the talus and then hopping down the trail, all the way down there. And oh man, then I got a speeding ticket for going like 3 miles over on my way out of the park.
Did you tell him he had a broken foot?
Yeah, and he didn't believe me, man. It was kind of rugged, It wasn't a great interaction, but bad luck, bad day, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the first one that comes to mind, because I actually broke something real good. But weather happens all the time, though. You know, you could either get shut out or trapped or shut down. Or one great day some summers ago, there was this huge crew up at Area D in Mount Evans. And with all these people there, all these pads, people were trying all the high balls. There was this massive lineup on the nothing, and it was a good time, And here we are, way up high, 12,000 feet or so, at the top of this bowl. And then the weather just kind of comes over the cliff, just like that. And then everybody's just trapped, and we're there for a couple of hours. And, finally there's sort of maybe a break in the storm. And you have to hike up to get back to your car,
that's right.
There's like 1,000 feet of elevation gain in maybe half a mile or something. So we just started pounding for it, and oh man, more lightning rolls in, and like hiking further up into the storm on the big exposed slope and all of that. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Suddenly it changes from bouldering to like Alpine-esque with big old square on your back,
Yeah, totally.
You can get into it pretty quick, but,
so one thing I'd like to talk about is conservation in the Alpine zone, because we were talking about conservation earlier, but I think not a lot of people know about how fragile that environment is. And one thing that I've noticed over the years is there's been a lot of controversy over pad stashing in the Alpine zone, but also just, cleaning off boulders and stuff like that. I think you have to be a little bit more careful about the impact in the Alpine zone because it doesn't come back as quickly as it would at a lower elevation. Do you agree with that, or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a sensitive environment, especially when we talk about places that have things like Alpine tundra, for example. It's there's a huge chunk of the year, and maybe using Mount Evans as an example, let's say Lincoln Lake, big sunny dry slope much of the year, and sensitive. If it catches a whole lot of traffic, you lose kind of all the grasses and whatnot that sort of hold the slope together, and give us all the great wildflowers in July and stuff like that. Also, there's a whole bunch of critters up there that are going to be eating your power bars. I mean, you can climb on the black wall and whatnot and watch the marmots come running up.
They'll eat through your backpack.
Oh yeah, we met this guy up there who had put up a number of the routes on the black wall, and while we were climbing, marmot totally tore into his pack, ate his phone case, ate half of his lunch, like just ruined stuff. Yeah, a little awareness out there for for the critters helps too. But especially when you consider like we're kind of in a unique area here on the Front Range because we're close to Denver and Boulder and Fort Collins, and there's a lot of climbers here, and we have 1 hour access to big time Alpine areas. That's great. That's super convenient. That convenience, that accessibility can really easily mean, well, there's a lot of traffic. Everybody getting on the same page. We've been doing pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
A lot of people self-police really well. There's been a handful of cleanups that we've done over the years. Various people have volunteered to organize and clean up stuff at Mount Evans and up at the park even and whatnot. We do pretty good around here, I think.
Yeah. And what about your pad selection for the Alpine? Does it depend on the area?
Totally. So many Alpine areas. Well, usually when you can talk about an Alpine area, you can just sort of jump the gun and think Talus.
Totally.
Like, so many bad landings out there. It's not all like that though, is it? Sometimes you're walking out there and it's knee-deep flowers. It's awesome. So I tend to like to have I use it like a BD Mondo pad pretty much all the time. They just released some new ones and they're lighter than the others, same square footage and whatnot. And square footage is kind of what I'm going for whenever I'm in the Alpine, to cover all those pointy rocks and stuff. A lot of places like Rocky Mountain National Park comes to mind, since there's kind of a lot of longer boulder problems there, and they're steep, so they cover a lot of ground. So yeah, that square footage, that coverage goes a long ways. Depending on what I'm after, typically I'll carry at least a Mondo, or maybe like a Mondo and a drop zone attached to the back or something like that. It depends on the hike.
Yeah. And are you doing much reconnaissance online?
Ooh, absolutely. Yeah.
Especially like when you haven't been to an area in a while, because sometimes you don't even know what to expect. You don't know how much snow is going to be out there, if you're going to have to dig out landing zones. And
I that's actually a really good point. There isn't a whole lot of there should be some resource somewhere where somebody can like say, all right, it's spring, but it's not exactly late spring. It's not quite summer, and I want to come out from Boston and climb in the park.
Yeah.
Somewhere they should be able to find out, like, not this year, man. You don't know. Maybe give it like another month or two, even, Yeah, I mean, everything from the amazingness that Google Earth is to finding spots out there in the nowhere. To I'm kind of a dork on conditions reports and stuff. I watch the weather pretty religiously.
And what sites are you using for conditions?
I like a combination of like NOAA and Wonderground are kind of my favorites.
Yeah.
And I'll dig up webcams and stuff like that. Webcams are awesome if you can find them. But you were talking about recons, like, yeah, that's absolutely first tracks of the season. Super cool. That's always fun when you walk up there and you're like, ooh, No one's been up to the such and such boulder yet or whatever. You know, it's cool to just make a day out of that. You know, don't take your pads, maybe take a chalk bag and, you know, put your gaiters on and some poles and just go swimming out there and like see what things are like. Maybe take a shovel, start digging, do some community service, you know, build a little flat landing and some benches to sit on, you know, It's, I look forward to that actually. I'm looking forward to that this year. I've got these, I'm not a skier at all. I've never skied. I know how to snowboard sort of. But I got these fat little trekking skis that BD just started making, and they're for like cruising around. They're like snowshoes, but skis. Yeah. So I'm kind of psyched to go back to, you know, with this heavy snow that we had this year to trek up to somewhere in the park or like up to Area B in Mount Evans and check out some of those high balls with the bad landings. See if there's anything that can be leveled out.
And before I let you go, I have one more difficult question. So, do you have a most memorable Alpine boulder send? Or first ascent?
Memorable Alpine boulder send. In the Alpine. I've been so like in the desert for like the last 4 years. I'm like, well, that one was good. Whoa, that one was really good. Whoa.
Well, let's open it up. It doesn't have to be in the Alpine.
Well, I can't say like right now I'm the thing I'm most excited about, and like if we can step out of the Alpine.
Sure.
I just did my 2-year boulder project out in the creek last week.
Whoa.
And it was pretty satisfying. It was kind of a scary thing and kind of a walk out in the back country. And I spent a lot of days working on it. When I first found it, I sort of thought it was like I don't know, it was going to be like a V6 or maybe like a V8 or something like that. And it's tall and scary, but like looks solid. It's compression. It's like maybe I can just like jog out here and knock it out and it'll be awesome, you know. And when I did just jog out there with a pad and shoes and stuff, I pulled onto it and immediately got the scope of just how involved it was going to turn out to be. So yeah, battled like, you know, either end of the seasons, getting either too cold or too hot, or a whole lot of solo top rope practice type of thing, like with this weird lasso sling, because it's a really steep pillar. It's like it sticks out into space at, you know, like a 80-degree angle or something like that. So and the ground falls away from it. The higher you go, the higher you get, kind of like the further out you go, and it's hardest at the end. And there was just all these factors, you know, and it's, you know, it's about 4 miles into the backcountry. Yeah. And you know, it was nice when people were out there. A handful of times some folks came out and sort of backed me up, or part of me wanted to do it by myself.
Yeah.
You know? And I've had a lot I of that out there.
Do you feel like there's less pressure when there's not people there?
Oh, all kinds of things. Like, you know, I feel like when I go out, say with a group of people, we're out and we're hanging out, you know. If I'm working on a project, that's almost like, I wouldn't say anything like a work day or anything like that. But you're there to do something. You got to focus, and it's got to be about you and your day and how you're feeling and whatnot, especially if you're trying something hard. Yeah. Or scary, or like all of this, you know, extra baggage with the thing. Like, sit there with it and concentrate and take your time. That's what I need to do anyways for a boulder problem, say. So going out with folks sometimes, like it's easy for me to get distracted, you know, and we're just hanging out now and just, it's a fun day. I don't have to. Yeah. Let's totally, you know, and let's do this thing. I can't say no to this one. Yeah. And all of a sudden we don't really need to go to the thing. You know? Like, I don't want you guys to walk all the way out there or whatever, but all kinds of things though, really, like, you know, sometimes people's encouragement gets you up stuff. Sometimes people's bad vibe keeps you from getting up stuff, you know, like, I don't know. I've climbed alone for a long time, and it's interesting though. I have of late sort of felt maybe like, more like climbing with other people lately. And this last experience and just my last trip to Europe, it was solo trip for like six plus weeks. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm kind of feeling like doing something else now, and this last project was kind of like a little punctuation to that thought in a way. Like, hey, wow, this was rad, and this was a really cool journey for you and whatnot. And I don't think it's like a done thing or anything, but
were you able to document that at all?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Is that out online?
No, I'm hanging on to it until I've got a purpose for it, I think.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Yeah. I would actually like, so I'm out there and I'm by myself and I've got one camera and one angle, and it's a super crazy impressive line. So I kind of want to like wrangle somebody up who knows what they're doing and has a crew, and get maybe a drone permit or something, and and shoot it properly, because it's really impressive. I'm really attached to it. It's sort of been like polluting my climbing for like the last 2 years. I haven't hardly been able to like concentrate on other stuff. I spent all last year like trying to learn how to off-width climb and get trad climbing better and whatnot. And
interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. And I don't know, the whole time, no matter where I'm at, no matter what I'm trying, I've been thinking about this thing. So it's kind of nice to get it off the plate, really. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, big projects can be like that too. Yeah.
What got you into climbing in the first place? Obviously, you've already talked about your connection to the outdoors and the shapes and the beauty, but how were you first introduced?
Well, so I used to be into, I've skateboarded since I was like 10, and I used to race mountain bikes in high school and stuff like that. I was really into downhill and dual slalom, and those were kind of my big focuses. Skateboarding was kind of what I think defined most of my youth, I would say. And we used to go in this little town, Durango. We'd all jump in a car and go out of town and go out to what I later discovered was like a little boulder garden where people go and climb. It's just this cluster of boulders outside of town called Turtle Lake. And we would go up and get on the big, we were like 16, or something, get on the big boulder and burn some bowls, man, and hang out, and it was just cool. It was cool to be out there. And I would always push for it. Like, let's get out of town, let's get out somewhere cool. There's a nice view out there, and we'd climb up onto this boulder, and it's maybe 30 feet tall and maybe like 5'2" or something, just engaging enough in a pair of like simple skate shoes, But I remember coming down from that boulder with this, posse of miscreants, and like, we're just kind of like threading through the little trails that go through all the Gamble Oak and whatnot. And right at the overhanging roadside boulder, there's this dude just locking off and climbing super smoothly out through this really steep overhang. The first thing you see when you pull up is like, wow, there's this overhanging boulder with chalk on holds. And I remember, hanging out and watching him climb for a bit, and pulling on a couple of the holds, and immediately getting the idea of like, whoa, there's some mastery involved.
Absolutely.
Like, you don't to not just like thrutch and blah and somehow latch the next hold, but to pull on and smoothly move with control. I got a sense of the scale of strength and balance and all this stuff right away. And so I talked to the guy for a little while and was like, so what's the deal here? And he started pointing out lines to me. Well, here's how it goes. We start here, we climb up this way, and that's one route, tops out right there. Here's another one over here that goes up through these pockets, cuts to the left. Here's another line. Watched him climb a little bit, and I did one, and I got it. Like, I walked around this boulder garden and I could see lines. From then on, like,
it's like the Matrix.
Oh, totally. Everything just sort of fell into place, and and I'm walking around these big boulders and I'm seeing lines that line of chalk, and you're like, okay, cool, I get it. I see the moves. And then spots where there weren't lines yet, and you're like, those holds connect, and it just it fell into place right away, and it seemed cool, I mean, my first exposure to climbing growing up in tiny town Texas, like I did, was like National Geographic, you know. I think some guys were suffering up K2, you know. It looked heinous, you know. So like, I took my mom's sewing kit apart and made like a climbing rig for some Lego guys, you know, because that was really cool. Other than that, I like ate it out under my treehouse in like army gear and stuff, and like took grounders, breaking not climbing gear, you know, hardware store stuff. And I didn't climb until I was like, 15, 16 when I moved to Durango, to Colorado.
Well, thanks for stopping by. It's been good talking with
Yeah,
you.
appreciate you.
Thanks, Chris. Well, that's the end of this show. Thank you for tuning in. I want to thank our sponsor, Evolve. Make sure to check out their new lifestyle shoe, the Rebel, available at REI and REI.com. Also want to thank Anton Krupicka and Chris Schulte for stopping by. Theme music was provided by Small Houses at smallhouses.band. And if you've not done so already, please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and subscribe. That's it. See you at the next Basecamp.